This video is brought to you by Squarespace. If you were a teenager today and your hair looked like this, you'd be on Ryanair looking for flights to Turkey to go and get it fixed.
Just spray GLH on and it instantly covers your bald spot.
However, back in the 60s through to the late 80s, if you had this haircut, it was very likely that you were part of Britain's most feared and controversial subculture.
Skinhead.
Skinhead.
Skinhead. Skinhead.
Skinhead.
Skinheads.
The skinheads.
So if you look at these people, it might shock you to find out the inspirations and the origins of this subculture. Just have a guess. Where do you think they're from? You know, just wild guess. Jamaica. That's right. Jamaica was the influence for much of the skinhead movement. Basically what happened is after World War II, England looked like the back of a co-op, you know, just rubbish everywhere. It was shit. We were destroyed after World War II. And so the politicians of this country hopped on the phone and got in touch with our beloved colonies. Our colonies who, you know, we had a history of sort of not treating very well. We said, guys, how about, you know, you leave sunny Jamaica, there's nothing for you there, mate, and come on over to grey, rainy Britain. You can rebuild our country, work long hours for very little money. And somehow the Jamaicans heard that and went, why not? Rude boys. It was a subculture that arose from like the poorer parts of Jamaica. In Kingston, it was often associated with gangsters, badaman, yardies, and their fashion was heavily influenced by what the US jazz and soul musicians were wearing. Everything would change somewhere in the 60s when the Rude Boys would meet a very English subculture, the mods. The mods were those modern daddies, you know, they were them boys who loved dressing smart. They were really about the future. And they were kind of, I guess, quite materialistic, quite consumerist, and they just had money to spend on things they enjoyed. But it'd be one day when, you know, Mikey the mod was fixing his Vespa and he looked up and he saw something. A rude boy. Their eyes locked. They took a step closer. A rush of emotions spread across their body. Confusion, excitement. The rude boy would come in with his cool fist bump handshake thing and the mod would awkwardly stutter and accidentally give him a hug. But the rude boys and the mods started to notice they had some things in common. But you see, towards the late end of the 60s, there was a split that was happening within the mods. The more like working class mod was starting to dress a bit different than the smooth mods. They realized that the long mod haircut was a disadvantage when you got into fights because they could just grab it and pull you. So some of the mods started to shave their head for like practical reasons down to a 2 or 3, and some of them started to grow out their sideburns.
Number 2.
Number 2.
Yeah, and cut part in as well, please.
Ever so slowly, by the end of the 60s, the clean-cut, polished, middle-class mod was morphing into something different. The skinhead. You gotta bear in mind that during the 60s, whilst all this is going on, there is also another fun group of bros called the hippies. And the hippies were like, I mean, they were just too nice. They were all love and peace and soppy, bollocksy shit. The skinhead started to appear as like a rebellion against that, in a way. It would appeal to teenagers who were more looking for like this aggressive, more macho, masculine look. They would wear Doc Marten boots, they would wear these like button-up t-shirts, they would wear braces, Levi 501 jeans with the bottoms turned up, maybe a Fred Perry t-shirt, and of course, a shaved buzz cut head. Now, it wasn't completely bald, but as I say, like a 2 or 3. But there was a big part of this bustling new subculture that was very important. And this would really be the thing that tied it all together. And that was the music.
I want all you skinheads to get up on your feet. Put your braces together and your boots on your feet. And give me some of that old moon stomping.
One tune that was really like the anthem of the skinhead was called Skinhead Moonstomp. It was by a band called Cimarip, which were a Jamaican band, and what started to happen, as I mentioned, was these Jamaican communities were starting to interact with the more working class elements of white British culture. This was happening a lot in and around London, where these people tend to be working the same sort of manual labour jobs. And so the music started to mix, and you were hearing these young white British kids listening to like ska ska, rock steady, and very early reggae music. And it created this very strange juxtaposition. You'd have these very working class white boys who were hanging out with Jamaican kids. Meanwhile, their dad was like a sworn racist. Little Billy would come home to hear his dad ranting about how the immigrants had taken his job. And then little Billy would go, "All right, Dad, I'll see you later. I'm just going to go hang out with Little Winston and listen to some reggae." And it was cool because these kids were really rebelling against their parents, but they were doing it in a very positive way. You know, they were breaking down racial barriers and sharing culture. This sort of combination of two cultures really created its very distinct thing with the skinhead. And the funny thing about the style is that the original shop that started selling it, the Ivy shop in Richmond, intended for the look to be like a preppy American college middle class look, but it ended up in the hands of the skinheads who made it very street, hard, macho kind of look.
So what is a skinhead?
People won't give you a chance. They only see the outside. They don't see what's really inside a person.
The skinhead subculture was massive in the late 60s. It was well within mainstream consciousness. Everyone knew what a skinhead was. There were famous books being written about skinheads. As well, a band called Slade tried to be skinhead for a few weeks, I guess, as like a marketing gimmick.
Some of the pubs I played on a Saturday night in the Black Country, when people were pissed up, and Saturday night was fighting night.
Which is kind of hilarious when you see what they ended up looking like. However, as big and as popular as the skinheads were becoming, there was one group that did not love the skinheads, and that was everyone else. 1969 is considered the golden age of the skinhead. At the same time, there was a few things going on in Britain. Football hooliganism was rife, you know, bros just beating the shit out of each other over football. And considering the fact that many football hooligans were young men, quite a few of those young men would just happen to be skinheads because it kind of made sense. And so what we would start to see is that any problem of like crime, drugs, gang activity, football hooliganism, it wasn't unlikely that some of the people doing some of that stuff were also wearing your Doc Martens and looking like skinheads.
And therefore they think I'm wasting myself. I mean, maybe I am. But I feel that's up to me. It's my own choice. I'll do what I like. I've got no worry about getting up for work and, oh, is my work up to standard? Will I get the sack? I mean, no one can put me down any further because I'm ready at the bottom, aren't I?
Before we go any further with this video, I want to give a massive shout to Squarespace for sponsoring. Squarespace is the #1 platform for building and developing your very own beautiful, gorgeous website. Now, whatever you do, whether you're selling rabbits or maybe you have a clothing brand or you're a PT, it's so important to have a good looking website. It makes you stand out from the rest of the competition. With tons of templates to choose from, you can pick any of them and customize them to perfectly fit your brand and what it is you do. And there's loads of built-in tools like email marketing, e-commerce, appointment scheduling that will just bring your website to that next level. I've been using Squarespace myself and I actually really enjoy using it. It's fun to do. It's easy. It doesn't take forever. It doesn't cost tons of money. So if you're thinking to make a website, be sure to check out squarespace.com/Jimmy the Giant. And to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain, use the code Jimmy the Giant. Anyway, back to the video.
Violent crime has soared by 17% in the past year, and it's there in the streets around the corner.
Angry skinheads would just go out, get into fights and just terrorize polite society. And it's true, there was very much a deep hatred and anger that was present within the skinhead movement.
Here these seconds, Black Bones, we hate them. We hate the Big Lamp, hate Wrighton, hate nearly all the crews, New Biggin, we hate New Biggin. And all hate us, you know what I mean?
But you see, 1969 is also 1 year after a very controversial speech was made by a Conservative MP known as Enoch Powell. Where basically, at the time, a complex range of problems spread across England. We were starting to have economic decline from having global competition when it came to manufacturing. There was very bad relations between the management class and like the labor union class. Really shit city planning that just built these depressing cities in England that people hated. There was an energy crisis. Britain was deindustrializing. A lot of shit was happening. And Enoch Powell saw all of that and went, nah, it's the immigrants.
Hey, you're lucky I came tonight, you know, because I won't be here tomorrow. Enoch Powell has offered me £1,000 to go home, which is great, really, because it's only £10 on the train from here to Birmingham.
Sadly, in the 60s, the immigrants that we asked to come in to rebuild our country after the war were now being used as like this scapegoat for all of the political failings of the politicians. And amongst all this, there would be one organisation that would find itself in the spotlight. The National Front. The National Front wanted a racially homogenous Britain. They wanted everyone to be white and they wanted to get immigrants out. The skinheads presented an opportunity for the National Front, an organic youth movement that was heavily tied in football hooliganism. They were downtrodden working class people who had nothing to lose. And so they started to recruit skinheads outside of football games with their magazine called Bulldog. This was an incredibly successful recruiting tool for the National Front. On top of this, they would also do big rallies. They would even have like discos. Slowly, some skinheads did start to trickle into the National Front. But it is very important that I stress that pretty much every single source I looked at made it very clear that the vast majority of skinheads were not in the National Front. They were not racist in this era. There was plenty of black people who were skinheads. They just really loved the fashion and the music.
What does reggae, is it your favourite music?
But of course.
Reggae?
Yeah,
is it your favourite music? Yeah.
Yeah.
The original skinhead movement was completely apolitical. It wasn't even left or right. But of course, the small subsection of skinheads who were racist, they were a bit more interesting for the media to talk about.
High unemployment in Britain, especially among the young and the unskilled, has made working-class whites ideal recruiting material for extreme right and left-wing political organisations.
Skinheads were getting tons of bad press. All over the newspaper, you would see stuff about hooligans, criminals, drug dealers, and hate crimes.
Journalist Alan Steen witnessed one incident when a gang of 80 skinheads took over a compartment and viciously terrified an old lady.
And for the newspapers, the media, this was a goldmine. They loved this and started to build a bit of a moral panic around England. Moral panic is a really important phrase to understand because it's very specific and very accurate. It's when you have a problem in society and the general public hear about this problem and they get very scared. So scared, in fact, that they start saying solutions, big ideas on how to fix this massive, massive problem that far exceed the reality of the actual size of the problem. However, in the case of the skinhead, it kind of became like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The media was calling all skinheads hooligans that you should be scared of and keep your children away from. And so it led more skinheads to kind of lean into that image a bit. Skinhead was the new edgy taboo counterculture that was scaring middle class Michael and Marjorie. And then, all of a sudden, it died.
Skinheads will disappear. There are signs of that already. A new trend will replace it, and the gangs could continue under different names, but in the same areas.
The 70s was like the era of glam rock and disco. Off at the back of the 60s, everyone was, hopped up on the hippie peace and love stuff, and the skinhead aesthetic didn't really align with the time. And so many skinheads left. They grew out their hair, and they started to listen to David Bowie, and they moved on with their lives. However, there is one thing that had not gone out of fashion, and that was the National Front. The NF was still doing their thing, just racisming around. And they were pretty sad that the skinhead was kind of dying because they were a bit of a useful tool for them. And so it left them angry at the world. An anger that the National Front realised, if we can just point this in the right direction, we're onto something. But the problem was that into the mid-70s, they disappeared. Well, that was until the second wave of skinheads. The second wave of skinhead really came around when punk started to become popular. I didn't know this, but originally the punks were actually more of I guess you could say middle classy, like the art kids. Your soft mate who does gender studies, he was more likely to be a punk. But that would all change with one band, and that was Sham 69. Sham 69 brought punk to the working class. Their lyrics were kind of anti-establishment. They had a lot of political populism. The music had this cool energy. They would use football chants, which I must say was pretty genius because it made it the soundtrack for football hooligans. But at the same time, there was another genre called two-tone. This was this fast-paced kind of punk-sounding reggae type of music. And it was truly a combination, clearly, of black Jamaican culture and white working class culture. Bands like The Specials, The Selector, and The Beat. All these bands were multicultural. You can see it with your eyes if you look at them. And they were skinheads. The Specials had a song called Skinhead Symphony. All of this had caused a resurgence in skinheads by the late 70s. People were dressing like it again. It was popular, but it also started to cause a rift in skinheads.
These musicians are outcasts, the lepers of the music business. They've been banned by the radio stations, boycotted by record shops, blacklisted by promoters. The landlord thinks he's booked a country and western band. He couldn't be further from the truth.
So how do I explain Oi? Oi was a subgenre of punk, came around in the late 70s, and basically it was blokes just not in a good mood. From what I can tell, Sham 69 never referred to themselves as Oi. It was like a label given to them retrospectively. But them, along with Angelic Upstarts, the Four Skins, you know, I have to read it, The Business, Anti-Establishment, Blitz, The Bloods, these bands weren't explicitly racist. In fact, many of them were openly anti-racist. We'll get more into that in a second. But regardless, it became a genre associated with far-right neo-Nazi skinheads. And this was a problem. The two-tone bands, who also had a massive skinhead fan base, bands like The Specials, who had black people playing the music that is clearly Jamaican influence. They were literally playing the music, and some of the skinheads in front of them were Zeke Heiling at them.
You know, if you're playing, you have maybe the first 4 or 5 rows all Zeke Heiling at the stage, at some stage during your set. And the only way that you could deal with it would be to stop the gig. And then a skinhead ambassador would come upstairs and sort of tap on the door and say, "Are you coming back on?" And you go, "No, we're not." You know, all your mates are all Zeke Heiling at us.
I just wonder, like, the level of mental gymnastics these racist skinheads had to go through, where they're sitting listening to Jamaican music, all the while being neo-Nazi. I just don't know how they did that in their brain. It was strange.
Part of being a skinhead is to be a nationalist, to be patriotic and proud of your country and proud of your race. There's a lot said about skinheads being started from blacks and these them, but I don't think that's right at all. I mean, I've heard these rude boys or whatever they're called, but I don't consider them to be skinheads anyway. I think skinheads is a white working class thing, really.
And so, as you'd expect, Oi bands were seeing lots of violence at their gigs, you know, places having riots, getting shut down. And this was causing bother for the bands. The bands were starting to get fed up, and this led to an opposition.
We're against racism in all facets of British life.
We want rebel music, street music, music that breaks down people's fear of one another.
So look, it's 1976. England's just going mental. We're all now racist, apparently. Eric Clapton, David Bowie, popular artists of the time were coming out, saying racist things on stage. I'm not just saying it like how people use the terms now, like genuinely, they liked Hitler. And with that, there were racist attacks all across England in the streets. You would also have just violence everywhere. There was anti-fascist groups that were now fighting against the racists. National Front was starting to put candidates forward for political elections. And so because rock music was starting to get tied in, especially Oi, Rock Against Racism came out as like a series of concerts to try and bring some racial harmony together. Sham 69 took the opportunity to perform here to just kind of dispel of the rumors that they were racist, because it was very clear that they had a very large neo-Nazi following. After that performance, as you'd expect, the neo-Nazis didn't like it. Leading up to 1979, at a concert at the Rainbow Theatre in Finsbury Park, which the National Front went to, broke it up, they were fighting, rushing the stage, and after that, Sham 69 just stopped playing gigs altogether. But then somehow it got worse.
This burnt-out shell is all that's left of the last place that band, the Four Skins, played in. This is the Hambra Tavern in Southall, a largely Asian immigrant area. And it was here that 3 so-called Oi bands, including the Four Skins, came on July the 3rd to play a concert. Some of the skinheads assaulted elderly Asians in the street, and they daubed shop windows with National Front slogans. Later that night, the Asians retaliated, and what followed turned into a full-scale race battle.
5 hours of rioting between the police, the local community, skinheads. 120 people were injured. Cars were burnt down. A tavern was burnt down. It was rather peak.
Naivety is probably the right word when you examine the whole style of the Oi bands. They're pro-violence, anti-black, anti-police. It's no wonder they attract Nazi skinhead followers.
And so look, you've had all of this stuff happening, and the media is obviously talking about this. Oi is now just branded as a neo-Nazi music genre. Skinheads as well are thrown into that. And most of the music industry that was supporting Oi bands just started to pull those bands out because they didn't want, obviously, anything to do with any of this.
The music trade quickly decided that Oi music was too closely associated with extremist politics for comfort, and that violence, whether it came from left or right, was bad for business.
And what all that left, basically, was the people who were in the oi genre, who were white supremacists, neo-Nazi, etc. Now all the sane, normal people had left. Oi was just their playground to enjoy. There were still some skinheads holding on, trying to fight back a bit. Bands like the Angelic Upstarts, and there were skinheads that even made an organisation called Sharps, which was skinheads against racial prejudice. So all of the non-racist skins would come and fight the racist skins, which, although it was good that they were against it, it just meant that the whole subculture was just this violent mess, always getting into fights. And so if you're just a normal bruh who just wants to wear clothes and dance to music, it kind of just become a little off-putting at this point. And so by the late 80s into like even now the 90s, the image of the skinhead was just fucked. You now had like white supremacist bands like Screwdriver, who are on a music promotion network, who are literally neo-Nazis called Blood and Honor, openly racist, connections to the National Front, links to Combat 18, which were like a neo-Nazi terrorist group. And the skinheads now were firmly used as like the foot soldiers to do the dirty work of the National Front and other racist parties. And so it wasn't looking very good for the skinheads. Sadly, after this, it kind of left the skinheads where they are now. All around the world, the extreme right movements, neo-Nazis, have often adopted the skinhead look. It has changed though. If you look closely at what the original skinheads look like, now it's far more military looking. They mainly wear black military boots instead of like the red Doc Martens. And now they're more so completely bald as opposed to like the number 2, number 3 shaved. There's less sideburns, more swastikas. And sadly, this aesthetic has just become synonymous with like the extreme right. They're literally all across the world. You see it in Germany, Poland, America, obviously England, somehow Malaysia. I don't know.
Di Malaysia dibagi pada 3 macam belah-belah skinhead ni.
And there's been lots of iconic films made about this period in history. And it's just really sad seeing this movement, this subculture that in the beginning was really cool. It was bringing together different ideas, making new things, showing that we can have differences but still enjoy each other's cultures. And it just, for the most part, at least in people's minds, just devolved into extreme racism.
Well, a black man, right, they came to this country first. They were exploited against, right, they were kicked out, and now what's happening? What's happening now? They're just getting everything that we want. We're getting exploited against. We're the ones that are being put down.
Often you see it with these violent subcultures that they tend to attract a certain type of young man who is raised in a certain type of situation because they offer them a way of feeling powerful and strong in society. People fear them. The skinhead was an inherently aggressive and kind of scary look. And so the radical far-right movements can see this opportunity. They just have to offer some solution, some radical ideology, and a scapegoat to point at, which in this case was migrants. It was a perfect storm that happened in England where this sort of racist rhetoric was rising and this subculture just happened to have some connection to it. It's very hard to imagine that the skinhead could ever shake this image now. It's like you couldn't really see the hippies ever being disattached from peace, love, and drugs. So I'm gonna end with like what happened to the skinhead. I mean, really, yeah, most of it got swept up into like the far right and stuff like that. There are still some OGs that are kind of holding on to the good old days. You even get some young people who aren't racist who are still attracted to it. But what happened in the 90s was very important. A new subculture would come along that would completely destroy racial barriers, class barriers, and brain chemistry. And that is the ravers. Make sure you subscribe because I will be making that video very soon. You can follow me on Twitch where I'll be showing my research for the raver video. I go live 3 PM on Wednesdays. Subscribe. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.